major transitions over the past year was for Kurt Cobain, the lead singer, songwriter, guitarist for the rock band Nirvana. He died in 1994 at the age of 27 and led a very, very checkered life. When he was very young, he used to tell everybody he was gay because he said he didn't like people. And therefore, if he told them he was gay, they would keep their distance. Only when he met and fell in love with a woman, Courtney Love, did he go, oh, well, maybe I'm bisexual then. But his entire mental process growing up seemed to be incredibly disturbed. He was homeless for a time, penniless. He used to do artwork, but he would use his own bodily fluids to paint with. And the more famous and successful he became, the more he got to resent fans and critics who were heaping praise on him and making him rich. But he said, well, they misinterpret my lyrics. They don't understand what I'm saying. And it just sent him into a spiral. He overdosed at one point on alcohol and drugs. He was experimenting with drugs from the age of 13 and became so depressed in the end that he went to a hotel room, took heroin, and shot himself. As I said, at the age of 27. It was actually several days before the body was discovered. And he left a suicide note, which enabled me to analyze the handwriting. And according to the writing, he was, I mean, you can see the note there. You don't have to be a handwriting analyst to know that that's a very disturbed hand. He was childish, moody, disconnected, intense, intelligent, and very, very focused too. The kind of person who, if things don't go according to plan or are out of his control, could actually affect him at a very deep level. Because you can't govern the universe, so you're not in control of what happens, but some people need to, otherwise it impacts them in a very, very adverse way, and that was him. Interestingly, at the bottom of the letter, he writes, I love you, in capital letters, twice. But there is a difference between the first I love you and the second I love you. The first one is kind of independent and clear thinking and has an intention behind it of communication. The second one, written presumably immediately afterwards, was way more telling. It was codependent. There was desperation. He needed somebody to lean on. And he was wide open and vulnerable. And it was at that wide open and vulnerable moment that he killed himself. When I went into the energy, he seemed at first to be falling. Only he wasn't falling. It was as if he was in a tank of water filled with dirt particles, oily bits, and he was sinking to the bottom. He went down and down and down without touching the walls, down and down, and eventually arrived in some version of that symbolic cave I always see in these pictures. Only this one was a lot darker. There was a dome immediately in front of him, but it was dark. In fact, it had a kind of rubbery surface. It was impregnable, like half a beach ball or something, black. It seemed to be that he had created a hell. It was a hell of his own making. And that's where his mind was. Instead of light, instead of grace, there was gloom and defeat and doom and misery and depression. That, I assume, represents his state of mind as he entered this phase. And once he decided that that was it, there was no way into that, he looked around. And there were two tunnels this time, metaphorical tunnels. No real clue as to which one he should choose, or indeed why there were two tunnels in the first place. But intuitively, I felt that he would go down the second one. So, ignoring the first one, I'd come back to that. I went up the second tunnel. And about halfway up, it rose up into a rocky wall. It was a blockage in the tunnel, almost as if the universe was saying to him, how much do you want ascension? How much do you want to let go of the burden you're carrying? After everything that's happened, are you willing to put in effort to that? Come on, show you care. And he did. He climbed the wall. And on the other side was a pool of water, like spa water. It was warm. It was reassuring. He could relax into it and at the same time begin to release his control over elements of his self, his consciousness or whatever, that he had held so tightly in his grip during his mortal life. His handwriting contains elements of constant overseeing, constant control to make sure his comfort zone isn't infiltrated. Now was an opportunity to release that, to stop trying to control the universe. And as I watched, under the water, patches of dark fluid were released. Not bodily fluid, because this is not a person with a body, but release of tensions, of self-denial, of concern, of upset, whatever these might be. But they flowed out from him under the surface of the water. And once they had, he felt lighter, he felt able to walk, and he left the pool, free of his sins. Sins are crimes against the self, against one's own integrity. It's an archery term, like you missed the target. You could have gone up the path of higher intention. You didn't. You settled for the path of lesser intention. And as a result, there was a karmic consequence for that. But now this had drained away in the pool. He'd let go of control and was able to proceed. And eventually, he reached the dome. This metaphorical light I always see at the end of these pictures. He was feeling 50,000 times happier than when he'd arrived. For some people, this process is about letting go of external factors, ties to the mortal world, ego issues. For him, it seemed to be about letting go of internal pressures, the kind of bondage he'd held himself in all those years that could now be released. And as he touched the dome, it was like, wow, this is amazing. Wow, I can't wait for this now. And he simply stepped into it and vanished. It was a real happy ending for somebody who had arrived in a very, very disturbed state. But of course, this was the tunnel he chose. What about the first one? He could have gone up there instead. So I went all the way back down again and went up the first tunnel. This was a whole different state of affairs. If he had gone up this one, he would have walked into a big patch of spikes, maybe, or like a stiff brush if you were really tiny and had to navigate all the bristles. It was thorny, it was difficult, it tore at his flesh to the point where fluids leaked out again, but only because his defense mechanism, which had held him in place for 27 years, his defense mechanism had been punctured, and the poison that he'd held in was finally let out. But it was a really agonizing experience. Yes, he would get through. But by the time he emerged at the other side of the spikes, the bristles, he was but a shadow of the person who had gone into them. And so drained and so weakened that he said, okay, just take me. I'm ready. But it was a fight. The universe had to fight for him to let go of his internal turmoil, apparently. Whereas in the second tunnel, which actually is the one I think he chose, he was able to bathe it away and relax it away and succumb to the process In this one, he had to fight. He had to battle his way because he was still hanging on to all this poison. And at some point, in order to be light enough to lift, to ascend, you have to let go of that burden. You have to put that burden down. But in his struggle to retain it, because he was scared of letting it go, the handwriting says that, and the handwriting comes from the unconscious. So you know that beneath all the layers, that's what's going on. He couldn't let go of control because he was so scared of outside influences damaging him, hurting his sensibilities, which is why he guarded them with drugs when he was alive and alcohol, and why when he became popular, he didn't like it. Because opinions, criticism, even adulation that was kind of out of control pierced his defensive front and made him very, very unsettled. But now, after going through the thorny bristles, he was so weak that he had no fight left in him and just said, okay, take me, I'm done. And he went into the dome that way. But I've got a feeling that the choice he made was the second one. Maybe intuitively, if you have intuition when you're just consciousness. But somehow he knew that a more positive way to go was up the second tunnel with its spa water and its slow, gentle release of toxins. It's so often the case in these transitions that people have to release ego concerns, as I said. Usually it's about wrenching them away from all the stuff that preoccupied them during their time in form. In the case of Kurt Cobain, it was the internal self he had to deal with, not the external. You have beaten yourself up for so long that you don't even know what's real. You don't know how valuable you are, the talent you were given, the inspiration you are to others. You essentially, out of fear and a desire to control, lived for yourself, for your own protection, I suppose, fearing damage. Now, if he was born that way, then that's a very, very unfortunate way to have to live. But there was something different about his passage. Almost like an emergency case. Quick, we've got to pump this guy's stomach. Or quick, pump this guy's soul. Get the toxins out. Otherwise, he could be irredeemable. And in truth, nobody's irredeemable. But when he arrived and he saw that black dome, that was a marker of how much damage he had done to himself. And we so often, not to that extreme obviously, but we so often beat ourselves up over things with shame or fear or anxiety or regret, whatever it is. We beat ourselves up and we carry these poisons around with us for the rest of our days. And I think that's the lesson to be learned from this. We don't live, any of us, for a tremendously long time on this planet. Yet we spend so much of that time in self-analysis or feeling like we should have done this instead of that, or holding back, holding in for fear of losing control. For fear of looking foolish, or for fear of letting people down, or whatever it is, we hold ourselves in and we contain so many things that really just need to be released. And Kurt Cobain seemed to me, from the pictures, to be the extreme version of that. He didn't need saving from external agencies. He needed saving from himself. It's very unfortunate. He was a really, really talented guy, apparently. It didn't have to be that way. Be kind to yourself. None of us lives that long. That's what I learned from Kurt Cobain. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye-bye.